What is legal and what is just? What does it mean to be a man, and how well do you understand yourself? I only just watched The Godfather for the first time in my life a few days ago, and I wasn't sure I was gonna like the movie, but given how old it is, I have to say that it's actually quite good. And so, since the movie poses various philosophical questions, I'd like to tackle it in today's episode of Philosopher Reacts. With the help of various schools of philosophy, we'll try to answer some of the most intriguing questions this movie presents. And also, for the sake of transparency, I do not have a degree in philosophy. I once had the option of going down that path, but I didn't find it smart to have a degree in a field that wouldn't give me any real job opportunity. This being said though, I still try my best to be worthy of the title, because I believe that being a philosopher is more than just any one degree. I kinda like to go off of Epictetus' view of philosophy. He didn't believe that philosophy was this dry and abstract thing. He was more of the belief that it's something you write about, talk about, read about, and explore to its fullest with other people. And also that you do it all the time, something you constantly practice and that you always have at your disposal. Not a one-time thing you kinda learn for a certain degree, but rather something you embody, internalize on a day-to-day basis, something that kinda becomes part of who you are. So personally, I just hope to make people think and question their own lives and ideas, and obviously to apply that same principle within my own life as well. To learn alongside of you many beautiful things philosophy has to offer, even without having a certain degree myself. But other than that, given that last time I almost lost my voice during recording, I came prepared and brought a cup of Tibetan butter tea. And I think I'm just gonna leave this there and not explain what exactly this is, but let me just tell you, it's delicious. Okay, now, let's analyze this classic movie already.
My father's no different than any other powerful man. Any man who's responsible for other people. Like a senator or a president.
You know how naive you sound.
Why?
Senators and presidents don't have men killed.
Oh. Who's being naive, Kay?
For anyone who hasn't watched the movie, I don't think I'll be going through any big spoilers in this video, but in case I do, I'll give you a warning in advance. So if you haven't watched the movie, you probably want to know that the movie takes place during around the 40s, and it's also a time where prohibition is everywhere. The government had made many now fairly normal activities completely illegal, from drinking alcohol all the way to gambling. But as you probably already know, just because something is illegal does not mean that people will stop consuming. And so, eventually and inevitably, a black market will be created. And it's in this exact market that one of our main protagonists, Don Corleone, has a huge influence over. He's the head of the Sicilian Corleone family and the boss of a major crime syndicate. And the more I watched the movie, the more the question arose, how the hell does he even have that much power? Well, and that's when it hit me. It's exactly because of prohibition that he has it in the first place. And before I explain further, let me first ask the question, is prohibition moral? Well, maybe let's rephrase it. Is it moral to have the government decide what an adult human being can do with his own body and money? You may even be inclined to say yes, given that the government already makes laws against killing other people, but I think that that's more of a question of where my rights begin and your rights end. But if I'm consuming something that only harms myself, why would that be the government's business? And so as you can see, the answer is not that simple. It really depends from where you're coming from and what your views are of government and personal accountability. And so, to maybe try and help us a bit and give us various perspectives, I'd like to get the help from a few past philosophers and their views of government. Thomas Hobbes, John Locke, Montesquieu, and Rousseau. So, Thomas Hobbes. He was an English philosopher who lived during the 17th century and was a very strong proponent of the powers of the king. He believed that human nature was chaotic and erratic, and only through a social contract, as he called it, could things ever really be improved. He thought that humans had to agree to come together and then give away all their rights to a leviathan-like force like government, who would then impose order onto humanity, basically allowing it to create whatever laws it deemed fit. Oh, and he also believed that once the people had agreed on a leader, they had no right to revolt against him any longer. So I think that from Hobbes' perspective, he would have probably agreed with the idea of prohibition if that's what the sovereign or the king thought to be best. And personally, I obviously disagree, but we'll talk more about that later. For now, let's move on to John Locke and Montesquieu. They both lived more or less during the same time frame and became strong influences in how we in the West ended up governing. They disagreed somewhat when it comes to the nature of humanity, because while Locke agreed with Hobbes that the state of nature is chaotic and brutal, Montesquieu was of the belief that the natural human would be too afraid and desperate for survival to ever be cruel. He thought that they would seek community and then a society would be formed from it. I think that if you've watched my latest Primal video, you can probably guess where I myself stand. But despite their small differences, they both generally agreed that the natural rights of humans, like life, liberty, and property, existed in the state of nature and could never be taken away or even voluntarily given up by any individual. These rights were inalienable. And according to Locke, in his book Two Treatises of Government, the natural rights of individuals limited the power of the king. The king did not hold any absolute power as Hobbes had believed, but acted only to enforce and protect the natural rights of the people. As Locke once wrote, absolute monarchs are but men. And so, he also believed that if a sovereign violated these rights, the social contract was broken, and so obviously the people had the right to revolt and establish a new government. And so, where would they stand when it comes to the question of prohibition? Well, it's obviously hard to say without having them here, but if I had to guess, I would say that according to their view of government, they're more likely to find it morally unjustified for any ruler to decide this much over someone's personal life. And lastly, we have Rousseau. He was a Swiss philosopher that famously believed that man is born free and everywhere he is in chains. And I think that's a quote that many of us nowadays can relate to very well. Rousseau thought that in a state of nature, humans were all free, equal, peaceful, and happy. And it's only when people began to claim ownership of property, he argued that then inequality, murder, and war resulted. According to him, the powerful rich stole the land belonging to everyone and then fooled the common people into accepting them as rulers. But he was not an anarchist either, because he too saw problems in the state of nature that had to be fixed by some form of government. And so, he also believed that people had to enter into a social contract, and that they would give up all their rights, but not to a king, rather to the whole community, all the people that are part of it. And so, with that contract, he thought that the people would then exercise their general will, the will of the people as you may say, to then make laws for the public good. So it's not that easy to say where he would stand, but if I had to guess, I'd assume that he would claim prohibition to be moral as long as it was in line with the will of the people. So how do we deal with this question now? Well, taking what we've learned, it kinda depends on your view of personal accountability. If you think more like Hobbes or Rousseau, believe that if agreed by the majority, your right should be given away to a king, a sovereign, or to the majority of the people, the will of the people as you may call it, then you're more likely to believe that your right to choose for yourself does not supersede the will of the people or the will of the king. In other words, you would probably believe that prohibition is moral, yes. But I personally, and probably most of you as well, would agree more with Locke and Montesquieu on the fact that some rights of ours are above any will whatsoever. And so, I'd like to finish off this chapter by explaining why I don't think prohibition is moral, and I'll be making a moral case and a logical case.
Then I said to my wife, for justice, we must go to Don Corleone.
First, from a moral perspective, who are you or any of you to tell another adult human being what he or she can or cannot do with their own bodies? After all, it's their decision what they decide to do with themselves. But I may get that you're trying to tell me that, well, but wouldn't it be more compassionate for me to try and stop someone from harming themselves? Well, not really. Well, kinda. It depends. I think that allowing people to make mistakes is the only compassionate way to deal with any of these situations. Because I believe that it's only then that people will realize themselves what the mistake is that they are making and then, hopefully, be able to get out of it again. And obviously I'm not telling you to just give up on people and be like, if you want to make a mistake, go ahead and do it, what do I care? Because that wouldn't be compassionate either. I'm just saying that it makes more sense to tell someone, you do what you think is right for yourself, and you make the mistakes you think you have to make. And then, once you've made those, and you realize that you're in the gutter basically, I'll be there to help you out of the situation because, be it because of addiction or another reason, if they can't stop themselves from making those mistakes, that's when you step in and help them if that's what they need. So personally, that's just my opinion, but I think people should be allowed to make mistakes because it's only then that they will actually realize that they made a mistake and then learn from it and grow through it. And now the logical perspective. For that, let's go back to the Godfather. Again, why does he have so much power? As I already said, it's very simple. It's because of prohibition itself. And if that doesn't make sense on face value, let me explain. If the government makes something illegal, right? That doesn't stop everyone who was consuming it to just stop consuming it. People will still have that craving, that will to have it, and so eventually they will find other ways to obtain whatever it is they're trying to obtain. And so, a black market will be created. But the thing about a black market is that it is illegal. Only a few handful of individuals will ever be willing to take the risk to run any black market operations. And so, what you'll end up with a few people on the top that control the entirety of the black market because nobody else had the courage or the will to get there. And the problem with that situation is that you end up losing a lot of market competition because the amount of people that would even take that risk is already small, and everyone who would dare to now enter the market would be instantly killed. And so, inevitably, you end up with a Don Corleone. One man that controls so much of a market because nobody else was willing to do so. And once he then had the power, together with the other 5 heads of the mob, they were able to quench any competition whatsoever, making the product they sell low quality and the practices they use to stay in power worse and worse by the day. And so as you can see, even if prohibition was moral, it just doesn't work. It only empowers criminals to do worse and then gives them more and more power so that eventually they have enough money to even buy out cops, politicians, and judges. Oh, and quickly, before we move on, I'd like to make a few last remarks on this topic. First of all, law does not equal justice. I think that's very self-explanatory to many of you, because you really just have to look at history. From Jewish and African enslavement all the way to what the Nazis did in World War II, all of these things were illegal. So when you're talking about laws and governments, maybe reconsider how much of morality actually has place in it. Make sure that you don't confuse the two. And the last point I want to make is that just because something is moral does not mean that it has to be legislated. And why? I mean, if it's moral, shouldn't it become a law? Well, not necessarily, because the government is not your parents. When it comes to morality, we can clearly see by the examples of history that the government has no idea what it actually is. And if something is actually moral, it's for your parents to teach it to you or for you to find it out yourself. Because morality cannot be forced onto people. It's something that everyone has to find for themselves, and so you will never be able to legislate it.
You spend time with your family?
Sure I do.
Good. Because a man who doesn't spend time with his family can never be a real man. Come here.
So, what does it mean to be a man? To be honest, I don't know. How should I put this? Well, I did grow up without a father, but not entirely without a father figure. That I had, at least for some time. When I was still young and still living in Portugal, my godfather, he was a father I never had. He was such a kind man, and really, you could tell that he was happy with life and everything around him. Whenever he entered a room, he just lit up everyone's hearts, and I've always loved him like a father. But as you may have been able to tell by the way I'm talking, he's not anymore. He passed when I was still a kid, and so the one father figure I had, well, I never got old enough to ask him questions on what it means to be a man. And so, because of it, at least that's how I interpret it, I've spent a long time kind of confused and lost and just wandering around trying to figure out what man I want to be, what it even means to be a man, and obviously what man I don't want to be. And it wasn't always easy, and I'm not there yet either, of course. And I think that's also what made it a bit hard on me whenever I was watching a movie or TV show when they were tackling the question of manhood and manliness. And I mean, of course it was hard on me. What the hell did I know? I had no idea. No real examples to look at and try to derive what I want and don't want for myself. But with time, I was able to find new father figures, be it in something as simple as a movie or in real life, of course. And it's in all these movies that I've learned one thing, and that's the fact that there is not one thing that makes you a man. Every man will be different in how he becomes a man and what type of man he is. But there is one red line that I've probably seen in most examples of a good father figure or a good man. And it's the same red line, the same aspect of what it means to be a man, that this movie, The Godfather, also perfectly encapsulates. And that is the question of responsibility. Personally, and again, this is my view, I may have no idea what I'm talking about, Every man may be different, but what combines them all is the fact that they are incredibly responsible for the people around them. And I felt this myself. When I was a kid and even a young teenager, life was good. I had a good life, I had a good childhood, that's for sure, but it wasn't always easy either for me and my mom. Especially considering that for a good time, we were immigrants in a new country where we didn't even speak the language. So things definitely got somewhat complicated every now and then. But that being said, my mom always made sure that I had enough food on the table and enough love in my heart. And even so, when my teenage years started to come around, I became somewhat... I'm not going to say depressed because that's a bit strong, but I'm not going to say bored either because that doesn't quite capture it. I think it's something more like meaninglessness. I felt this huge feeling and sensation of meaninglessness flowing all over me. And to put it simply, things got really bad. I mean, not to the point of having suicidal thoughts, but I was starting to ask what the hell is the point of it all? If I don't have any meaning towards any of this, towards life, then why am I even studying as much as I am? Why am I moving so much if I have nothing to move towards? And I think that in that moment, it would have been good to have someone tell me that, hey, what you are lacking is responsibility. And it was. I mean, now I know in retrospect, and it may not be for you. You may be in a similar situation and it's not that for you, but for me it was. I was definitely lacking responsibility. And not necessarily for myself. I was very responsible and self-dependent from a very early age on because we had to, given that it was just me and my mom. And so oftentimes I had to make food for myself when I was, 8 or 9 years old. But I'm talking about responsibility towards others. I mean, the only people I really cared for was my mom. And she was very good at taking care of herself. So what was I going to do? But regardless of that, things changed. They changed dramatically when I was 15, I think. 14 or 15 years old, something like that. Because that is when I finally got a dog. Things changed quite a bit. Especially when I first had that dog in front of me at home. It was just a small ball of fur. I'm talking maybe like the size of 2 of my fists combined. Like, that's it. I mean, that's how small she was. And what I felt in that moment was, in a way, indescribable. I'm gonna try to describe it, but it was really indescribable. Like, I had that dog in front of me and I knew that this small living being fully depends on me now. If I mess up, if I do something wrong, well, she could die. And I would then know it would be 100% my own fault. And that was kind of overwhelming at first. You feel this immense sense of power, but not in a bad way, not in a corrupting way, but in a responsible way. As Uncle Ben once told us,
with great power comes great responsibility.
And he's right. In that moment, I could clearly feel it. I could clearly feel what it means for me to be a man. I had to be responsible for this dog, and that didn't just mean that I gave her food and walked her 3 times a day. No, it also meant that I did a lot of research on her health and my health as well. Why? Because if I mess up on myself, and I become sick or weak, then how can I expect to be able to take care of her? I can't. And it's this feeling of responsibility over others, over the people that you love, that the Godfather embodied perfectly in my opinion. I mean, just look at Michael Corleone. In the beginning of the movie, he was treated more like the women and the children from this time period, where he was given no responsibility whatsoever and was almost treated like an outsider. His own family didn't treat him with respect because he didn't have anything or anyone to be responsible over. All he had was this hero-like life of his. But then, throughout the movie, you can clearly tell that he starts to become more and more responsible of the family business and of the family as a whole as well, to the point where everyone around him starts to respect him more because of it. But I also think that this movie is somewhat of a warning sign for every boy who is trying to become a man. As a man, in the movie's perspective and in my perspective, you will need to take on responsibility. But, and that's where you have to watch out, when taking on that much responsibility, you may do things that you would otherwise find abhorrent. Horrible things that you're doing to protect your family and the ones you love. The people that you are responsible for. And here is where I'd like to quote Friedrich Nietzsche from his book Beyond Good and Evil. That which is done out of love always takes place beyond good and evil. So make sure to watch out. I'm not going to spoil anything, but as we can clearly tell within the movie, Michael goes from a hero to, well, somewhat of the opposite. And you could clearly make the case that this all happened, why? Because he was looking out for the people he loved. And while that's a noble reason, ask yourself if that's the type of man you want to become. one that will destroy other families just out of fear for the ones he loves. So ask yourself once again, what does it mean to be a man? Is it maybe the same thing it means for me? Or is it something else? I can't really tell you. That is for you to find out.
How did things ever get so far? I don't know. It was so unfortunate, so unnecessary. And as a reasonable man, I'm willing to do whatever's necessary to find a peaceful solution to these problems.
To start off this chapter, I'd like to quote Seneca. Food does no good and is not assimilated into the body if it leaves the stomach as soon as it is eaten. I wrote this quote down in my notes when I was reading Meditations, and I gotta be honest, I don't quite remember the context, but either way, I think it's a great metaphor for emotional intelligence. And how so? Well, maybe let me better explain the quote first. What Seneca is trying to say is that whenever you eat something, whatever food it is, hopefully it's full of nutrients and healthy fats and so on, and therefore when you eat that food, your stomach, small intestine, large intestine and so on, they will do their best to digest the food, to get out of it all of the nutrients it has to offer, and then send it all over the body for you to profit from. And so, obviously, if the food hits your stomach and then leaves it right away, your body will have no time to actually digest and profit from the food you offered. All that will happen is that you'll end up pooping out the same thing you just ate. And how exactly does this shit actually help us? Well, think of it like this. Whenever you encounter any stressful situation, your brain will receive an influx of thoughts and emotions that you then probably will let out in a millisecond. And as you can see, this can easily become problematic, saying things you didn't mean to say and lashing out at people who don't deserve it. And so, maybe it would be better for you, whenever you get this influx of emotions and thoughts, to maybe take a second, analyze them, try to digest them, and then take in all the good they have to offer, and only let out whatever is necessary. And how does this tie back to The Godfather? Well, just look at Vito Corleone. Throughout the entire movie, he proves to be a real mastermind of stoicism. In so many situations, he would have been more than justified to lash out and be angry at the people around him, but he decided to keep his calm and make the best out of the current situation. The best example being by the end of the movie, where he sits down with the other 5 heads of the mob, and, even having gone through some of the worst things a father can go through, still keep his calm and try to find out who was behind it all. And it's only because of that, only because he was able to channel his emotions, that he was then able to plan the mob's downfall with Michael. But I'm not saying that emotions are bad, of course not, but not understanding them, letting them run wild and then letting them overwhelm you, that certainly is. And so I'm gonna have to ask you, how well do you understand yourself? How well do you understand why you say and think and feel the things you do? You may think that you already perfectly understand yourself, but never be satisfied with it. Because you should always question why you are the way you are, and make sure that you don't overreact to things that could come back to haunt you. And this is where I think that Stoicism can be of great help. It's an ancient Greek school of philosophy that is very focused on understanding your own emotions, knowing all the nuances in those emotions, and then choose to make better decisions through it. Because the Stoics believe that it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. A quote by Epictetus that in my opinion is one of the greatest Stoics ever. And why? Because of another quote he has. You can bind up my leg, but not even Zeus has the power to break my freedom of choice. Epictetus was a strong believer, maybe even the strongest believer, of one's own freedom of choice. Whatever happens to you, it probably would have happened either way. But how you choose to react to it, now that's up to you. And there's a story about Epictetus that truly embodies this entire concept. Many of you may not know this, but he used to be a slave, and his master often tortured him by binding up his leg. And one day Epictetus told him, "If you put any more strain on my leg, it will break." And then the master continued. Then Epictetus repeated, "If you put any more strain on my leg, it will break." And then his leg actually broke. Epictetus looked at him and just said, "There, did I not tell you that it would break?" I really hope this story is real, because if it is, it's just such a badass moment. But either way, it perfectly encapsulates what some of Stoicism is all about. And I think there's a lot we can learn from Epictetus and other Stoics. A lot that can be very beneficial to us, because as you can see in the movie, the people that keep their emotions at bay, they tend to come out on top. But the ones that lash out and don't have their emotions under control, well, let's just say that they don't end up that well. And I just want to make a last point to make this clear. Your emotions are not bad. You need them to be able to live and to be a human, really. So don't worry about that. All the emotions you have, take them in for what they are. But try to understand them. Try to understand why you felt that. And then try to decide whether it's necessary to let this out or not. To wrap everything up, it was quite a good movie. It made me think over a lot of things from my own personal life. And I don't know, I just really enjoyed it. So I had a great time making this video as well because of it. Let me know what you thought of the video, whether you liked it or not. And I kind of changed up a little bit of the structure of the video, focus more on philosophers and the schools of philosophy, and also somewhat more on my own personal life, and a lot less on the actual movie. So let me know what format for the Philosopher React you preferred, from the first episode or from this one. But other than that, I hope you have a great day, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching, guys. I really hope you enjoyed the video. Over here we use philosophy and psychology to better understand life and to find our own meaning within it. There are many exciting things coming up, so if I were you, I'd subscribe and turn on notifications to stay up to date. See ya!
You never thought you'd miss that cat, did you?